Now we got another time change coming up already.
I know.
I hate that.
Come on, really quick.
Okay, thank you.
Birthday card?
Good evening. I would like to welcome you to this evening's City Council study session for Monday, March 5th. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And the first item on our agenda is the Cyber Incident After Action Report and Emergency Management discussion. IT Director Margaret Brocklander is here to discuss the After Action Report to the ransomware attack that occurred in October of 2017. Good evening, Ms. Brocklander.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. So the After Action Report is in your packet, so I'm going to give a real high level, and if you have questions, I would be happy to answer any of your questions. So the After Action is a very simple exercise.
Just to begin with, we got another one here. Is there any difference between the one we got in our packet and this one? Or
No, they're the same.
Oh, okay, just wanted to make sure there wasn't any change. Thank you for correcting that.
Yeah. So the After Action exercise is a very informal exercise. It includes all of the team members that were participants in the event and the recovery. And basically, we're focusing on two questions. What did we do well in each category, and what could we do better, so that we know where we need to improve? There's always room for improving on what it is we're doing. So those categories that we focused on was assessing the situation. So that is identifying the virus, where it entered, how many systems it affected, and pulling it off the network so that we can start the recovery process. In that category, we did perform with some challenges. It didn't go perfectly smooth. There is room for improvement. We identified that, and we'll move forward with it. One of the areas that we think would help us in this area is we don't have an emergency management plan with an emphasis in cybersecurity. If we had a plan that outlined what it is we had to do when we do it, what steps we take, it probably would have gone a lot smoother than it did. So, room for improvement. And I'd like to start working on the cyber part of that plan, but it takes an emergency manager to work on the emergency management side of that plan. Execution. One of the first things they teach you in incident management is execute the plan. We don't have a plan. We do have a plan. Our plan, I found, was from 2000. It's outdated. It's no longer relevant to 2018. So this is something that we really need to focus on getting updated for the city overall. Recovery of operations. We did identify several areas where we did really well on recovery. We also identified areas where there's room for improvement through automation, through our communications channels, just being more efficient in a lot of areas, cross-training, improving our infrastructure, improving some of our security controls. So all things that we have planned and or we're working on. But also in this area was identified the lack of the emergency management plan did slow us down a little bit. So this could have given us an outline of what steps we needed to take for recovery. Everyone would have knew what position they needed to be in and then how they contributed to recovering us more quickly. Areas for improvement.
And you told Sam that his position was not in France.
That's correct.
Right, okay, so that'll be part
He
of
is
the plan.
definitely not to go to France anymore. So then the last category is communications. Communications is a key area in an emergency management plan that outlines very clearly at what point you communicate, who you communicate to. And we did not have that. We did very well. We really implemented everywhere we needed to, but a plan would have helped us be a lot more efficient. So some areas for improvement. Each one of them is identified in great detail throughout the report. I believe that we need to have more discussion regarding emergency management and planning for emergencies, but I'll stop there and see if you have any questions.
Does council have any questions? Councilmember Martinez?
Thank you for this report. It was really thorough, and I'm glad you identified some things that we are doing well and what we can improve on. So obviously we need to update our plan. Going forward, how often do you think it would be a good idea to revisit that plan?
So in the emergency management world, and I am by no means a expert in it, they would like it updated on an annual basis with training exercises annually, so it's fresh in everyone's mind on how to react to an emergency.
Makes sense to me. Thank you.
And one of the reasons, if I might add, is that one of the reasons why a plan needs to be brought forward to the City Council is in the event of emergency where we would need to expend emergency funds in response, that you all put some parameters around that you see the plan, you're able to approve of that plan, and then whatever those spending parameters are so that we can move quickly. In this case, there were some expenses to get our servers back online, luckily not to the point of needing significant emergency expenditure, but that's an example of why it would need council approval.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Ms. Brocklander, and I took some of my notes on the digital packet, so I'll be referencing those pages. I think that's going to line up pretty closely here. So on Tuesday, October 3rd, the ransomware attack was first identified, and on that same night, it looks like we put out our request for assistance to surrounding municipalities. Brighton helped out on 10/4 the following day, restoring servers, and then it sounds like Denver was there 10/5 and 10/6, helping identify the source of ransomware and restoring end-user computers. Are we billed at all for that, or is that just
We were not.
voluntarily they were good sports and helped
They were
us
good
out?
sports. They gave us equipment and they volunteered their hours.
Wow.
Kudos to them. Let's say, do we have a policy in place if Brighton next week was to have some sort of meltdown in their IT department? Do we assist other municipalities when the distress call goes out?
We do not have an official agreement with any city. This is something that we need to work on as a part of our cyber disruption plan.
Very good. Thank you. One of the things that caught my eye, and this is the verbatim, was the patching policy. That many vulnerabilities can be fixed by applying vendor-provided security patches. It is the city's policy to apply the most recently released patch within 1 month of release. The practice of applying patch was not consistently applied across the organization. If end users were adversarial to applying the patch, the IT staff accommodated their request to postpone. Strict adherence to the patching policy will be followed without exceptions. Was the lack of a patch in any way a contributor to this ransomware attack?
In this particular case, it was not. But in a lot of cases, lack of patching is what allows somebody in. So we need to be very diligent about patching.
I am certainly not the expert. Do you think 30 days is frequently enough?
Well, Microsoft patches come out on a weekly basis, but a lot of them come out every 30 days. So as soon as they come out, they need to be applied.
And who in IT is verifying that?
So our system administrator is in charge of patching. That's their job, to make sure that we're always up to date.
Do you mind just explaining the adversarial, if end users were adversarial to applying the patch, there were staff that were resistant to updating their computer?
Yes. So our system administrator, if they came up against a group that did not want the patch to happen because it would interrupt productivity, that patch didn't happen, it got postponed. I understand that it's an interruption to productivity, but it is a danger to us not to get those patches on.
Sure.
So our policy is to apply those patches immediately, and that's what we're doing from now on.
Okay. Thank you again.
Sure.
Councilmember Berentine.
Can't it happen when it's going to have the least impact on any productivity?
Well, we try to.
Uh-huh.
It depends on the patch, it depends on the impact, and we also have 24/7 operations.
Okay. Well, that's true. Okay, that's true. I just was curious about that question. I mean, I think that we got a lot of help from Brighton because our assistant city manager at the time was from Brighton and knew people there, and I think that was pretty, not that you don't have connections and could get some people to help you, but he happened to have come from there and had some pretty good support and teamwork from that. So I really like that you're looking at making that more of an official part of the plan.
I also came from Brighton.
Well, I didn't realize that. He was always the one, I'm a cop from there, and so thought he just bullied people into helping.
To be in
So.
Denver, right?
So that was nice, but it's nice to know that you guys have that kind of networking, that you know other people in other municipalities and to help, and I'm sure that we would probably do some kind of help as well if something were to happen to somebody else.
Absolutely.
But that was nice that happened the way it did, and then it was with people that you knew and had some comfort level with. But I'm glad that you're integrating that piece into the plan so that if it happens again. Also, the updating to go ahead and make sure that this plan is updated on a fairly regular basis is kind of important. I mean, we used to have people you're our third assistant city manager since I've been back on council. I mean, it's not as, you have more of a movable employment force right now going on, and it's important that we have people trained in those positions a little bit more frequently, I guess, because we have a little bit more movement going on. So I'm glad that I think once a year is probably a reasonable thing to expect to get all of the players together. So I'm looking forward to that once you get that put together. So, and thanks for the work that you guys did, even in the absence of Sam, although we did all blame him until he came back, that it was his fault. It went very smooth considering that.
It did go smooth, especially when you compare us to CDOT.
I think you guys did an admirable job given the situation that happened, and I think that it had a little bit of tail effect to it in trying to get everything back together. But for the most part, it went pretty good. And I believe you were out of town at the same time as well at a conference.
Yes, both Sean and I were at a cyber conference, and Sam was in France, so the team was pretty small trying to get that together.
I'm sure the plan will include, who could fill in when there's other people that are gone. And I would like to think that it was that orchestrated and conspiratorial, but I doubt that it was orchestrated because you guys were out of town. It just happened to be that way.
Yeah, it was bad
as
timing.
things do. So thanks for your work on this, and I appreciate that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wink.
Thank you. Thanks for the well put together documentation and its clarity. A couple of questions, or one question and one comment. I also love the fact that you conducted this retrospective, going over what went well, what didn't go so well, what you'd like to have happen in the future. It's important. Is it something we all practice here? Is it something regularly
And after
practiced?
action?
Or routinely practiced, or is it kind of conducted only in a case where something's
It's something that I'm familiar with conducting because of incident management training, but I haven't been here long enough to answer if it's something that happens on a regular basis.
Yes, I imagine. Okay.
If we activate our incident command system, then yeah, we do after actions.
Okay.
And this was an ICS event.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Yeah. And the mention of the emergency management, the individual to lead such processes, I think raises the point of the importance of having emergency systems in place, not just in terms of our IT department, but when I look at the strategic plan and our construction of that we gradually, because these are costly, of course, but gradually weave in where we can stronger defenses against attacks, not only of the cyber nature.
If I might comment on Councilmember Wink's comment there, is that the importance of having an emergency manager, it's one of those items identified in our organizational plan. If you go back and look at that document, we say, hey, this is a need. We need to update our plans. We need to make sure we have proper management in an emergency situation. And, of course, it falls down the list as tyranny of the urgency. Well, something like this happens, it was definitely apparent that the lack of an emergency manager and the lack of somebody really pushing, updating our plans, training our staff, really kind of created a less than desirable situation. And so, but for the talent we have on our own staff to mitigate the problem, certainly the lack of an emergency manager on staff hurt us. And so what we'll be bringing forward more formally at a subsequent council meeting is the discussion about emergency management. And there's different models out there. I mean, it ranges from in-house, having your emergency manager position, that would be a City of Englewood employee, and it could also be something you contract out with. So perhaps you work with the Arapahoe County. That would be an option. Each have different costs associated with them. There's pros and cons, and it's a discussion that I think is worth having with the council again in a little bit more detail. But certainly the lack of, I think traditionally, at least over the past few years, what the city has done is essentially add emergency manager to the duties of somebody else, and it really is too much if we want to not only have an emergency management plan, emergency response plan, but have individual departmental plans, continuity of operations plans, as well as that training that is critical when we have turnover and the whole 9 yards. So I think it's worthy of a larger discussion, and certainly there's different models that work in different ways, and we do want to bring that forward at a later time.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson.
Thank you. And this is, I think Councilmember Wink brought up what I was most interested in, which is, I think you used the term continuity of operations plan. Is that organizations I've worked for call them business continuity plans too? Do we have one that's well articulated that
we have one
that dovetail with?
It is consistently being updated, albeit very slowly. And so some departments have what we call a continuity of operations plan, or a COOP, that is relevant. Most don't, and it is a big gap. We have an internal staff team that oversees that process, but again, we really need somebody with the expertise to help our departments. One of the good things, the silver linings that came out of this attack, was that essentially many of our departments had to create their own continuity of operations plan on the fly.
On the fly.
And we recorded that information, and now we have that. Especially, I don't know if it'll apply across the board, but certainly in cyber incidents, we now have an idea of how to prioritize our response. That helps. Ideally, that's not how you create a plan, though.
Right.
So, to your point, it's something we have. It's not adequate.
So that's helpful to know. I wasn't sure what it would, and I'm sure it's hard to pull all the departments together for it, but I encourage that we do have an annual, if not, organizations I've worked with at least every other year, you have to have it cleaned up and ready to go again. And all your staff know what's going on so that when it happens, they know you actually have a plan. The other part was the cloud computing. Are we at capacity now to make that work for an emergency? I know that at one point we didn't have much cloud computing, and so, but are we there now?
We have several systems that are now managed systems by the vendor, so they're considered cloud computing. Our new ERP is managed by the vendor, so that's a cloud system. Our mail system, our SharePoint system, they're all in the cloud. So we do have a couple out there.
Those really helped you out in this one.
That helps significantly, especially on those critical systems.
Yeah.
And then we have some smaller systems, less critical in the cloud.
And the last thing, I mean, this is really well put together. I love the strengths and weaknesses, the way you went through this. Would it be helpful to send a thank you from council or others to the cities that helped us, just to keep that goodwill going for one another? I'm sure they call you too when they have problems or something similar. I don't know if that would be useful or not, if it's just...
Or should we not remind them in case they want to bill us?
Yeah, my purpose was to keep the goodwill going.
I did personally reach out and say thank you to them, and I got them each a thank you gift for the team.
You did. Yeah, great, thank you.
And I sent a letter to Mayor Hancock's office.
Great.
Yeah.
Generosity always helps to keep one another in the good, so that's super. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I just want to thank IT for all the hard work that you did putting this back together. And it really, I mean, it isn't the greatest way to create a plan, but it sounds like there were a lot of lessons learned from this incident. And so in the long run, it's been very helpful.
Yes.
But we want to thank you very much, and thank you for the after-action report also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. The next agenda item is a capital project discussion, and City Manager Eric Keck is here to update us on the 5-year capital improvement plan projection and provide direction for allocating one-time surplus funds. for critical infrastructure
Ask a
needs.
question before we get this part started. Are we just discussing tonight, or is this information exchange, or are you trying to get direction from us?
This is
You know
informational
me,
and
I like to
directional.
have that on each one of these.
Yeah, no, understood.
It's just discussion.
Yeah, this is informational, and if should there be some direction, we're obviously always open to direction for this particular item. Mayor and Council, appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening. This item does emanate from a discussion that we had a few weeks ago concerning the end of the year 2017 fiscal year report, wherein we identified that we would be adding back $2.8 million to the unassigned fund balance. And at that point in time, I raised the issue that perhaps this is something that would be more prudent for us to not place that money, all of it at least, into the fund balance, because at this point we have nearly 26% fund reserve for 2018's budget year, but actually taking a look at and finding if there's an opportunity to reappropriate some of these funds towards capital projects that just weren't able to be funded in this current fiscal year. So as we take a look, Council, at the Council communication that I put together, you will see that there are 4 major project areas that we wanted to have a discussion with you this evening and just kind of inform you as to what's going on. And so heretofore, in the 2018 budget, we had set aside some funding for replacement or patching of certain areas of the roof for this particular building. Each of these floor plates in this building, as you might imagine, are roughly 45,000 square feet, because we have 138,000 square feet total in this building. And so the roof is quite large. And from my understanding from talking to our facilities manager, who's here this evening as well, Dan Long, this roof is fairly original and has been patched significantly since it was put on in 1982, I believe, when this building was built. So that's quite a run for a roof, and it is a membrane. It's called the TPM membrane, and those can last for 50 years, which is great. But what we've experienced now, after doing an analysis of the roof, is that $500,000 is not going to be enough to substantiate the necessary repairs. The company that we utilize through U.S. Communities, which is a purchasing cooperative who does our roofing, Garland is the name of the company, has indicated that you can't patch this anymore. It's a full replacement. And in order to do that, you're looking at a $1.6 million expenditure. So before we choke, obviously the important thing for us is that this is an asset that we own, or we are hopefully to own at some point in time. And so the question is whether or not we want to allocate that additional money or continue to try to patch or defer the overall continued maintenance for the building. This particular issue does have some policy level questions to it that we can come back to later this evening as to, again, what the council's desire is for this particular facility. Again, given the fact that the Weingarten assets are currently in receivership and will be sold, we've had a number of people contact us actually about trying to acquire the building, and we said, nope, we're not having that discussion right now until such time as the council has a strategy for an overall strategy for the entire city. So moving on with the items, another issue or a project that we have that's very ripe on the project list is the Cushing Park refurbishment. As you're aware, the Parks Master Plan, which this council adopted in 2017, enunciated Cushing Park as the top priority park that needed to be addressed for a number of reasons. And so with that, we actually had some funding set aside in this particular year to do mainly just design work and some rudimentary improvements to irrigation systems and some of the other systems that are related to the park. However, a significant amount of work, additional work, has been done subsequent to the adoption of the plan by our Parks, Recreation, and Library Director and her staff. And so this project has risen again to the point where it is potentially available for having some significant design and construction looked at as part of the 2018 fiscal year capital projects. Third, a project that has been on the list that was, again, didn't meet the funding level for 2018 was the Malley Center. They have a skylight system there that they wanted to maybe look at changing the translucent nature of it to allow more light in, and that, after some lighting studies done, they determined, well, we don't need to change the skylight. What we need to do is change the electrical and lighting systems in the building itself to afford additional natural light or additional light in the facility. And so that $28,000 project, it's seemingly small, is an important one to that facility and its operations. And so if, in fact, the council were to decide to appropriate funding, that could be a project that could move up. And lastly, council, this is a new project that has come to the forefront not because of lack of planning, but because of the failure of the Fabra Dam at the Inglewood Plaza. If you're familiar with Inglewood Plaza, it is the shopping center located essentially at Broadway and Hamden. And many people know it as the duck pond. The dam that holds that water in has failed completely. It's ripped. And we've had some of the foremost experts in Fabra dams come and look at it, including Obermeyer, the ski people that look at replacing, stuff on mountains and lifts, have said they can't replace it. They can't fix it. The tear is too great. And so what you probably have noticed is that our teams and crews have gone in and removed all the silt and sand that's been in that formerly pond area. It's a concrete floor and a concrete wall system that was holding that water in. But that's not going to last. Obviously, the few storms that are going to come in and use that urban drainage way flood area will bring soils again back. But our bigger concern at this point in time is to remediate that dam, remove it, and then seal the area that's the entry with basically trash gates. That would not allow persons and or dogs or other animals to get into that system because it's very dangerous if, in fact, the waters were high. Essentially, it would sweep you down and you'd end up in the river eventually. So it wouldn't be a very positive thing. And so we've put some figures together to actually have the dam removed and put up a temporary system. Would be about $100,000. That area is being looked at right now in concert with our public works staff as well as the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District for a project wherein we would remove the concrete channels that have held the water in for the pond and channelize that, shape it, and make it more of a natural stream bed. And we think that's an excellent idea, but the cost for that's about $2.3 million. The UDFCD on Urban Drainage and Flood Control basically has said they'd be willing to help fund that project because that's actually a drainage improvement that would facilitate and help them with flood control, but they're not able to do so until 2020. I don't want to sound like Barbara Walters, but 2020, I mean, that's a few years away. So the best that we could do right now would be to remove the dam and make that safe to the public, and that's what that $100,000 cost is. So as you've seen within the analysis itself that I've provided for you, as well as just looking at the data, on average, Council, let me go back one step. One thing I want to reiterate to both the Council and the public is the same pot of funds, largely, that provides operations for the city also covers our capital cost. There is the PIF, and of course, in the case of recreation and utilities, they have some other sources of funding. But the large capital projects that we're talking about right now and that you've seen on our capital project sheet are largely funded from the general fund, and that is constrained. On average, over the last few years, we've averaged about $5.5 million in capital projects that come from the general fund. What is typically transpires is we build our budget for looking at operations first. What is left over is then placed into capital projects. That is not a sustainable formula, albeit it's the only formula that we have currently for ensuring that we get capital projects work done. So it is fair to assume or to look at going forward that we'd have a little bit of growth in that, and roughly $6 million perhaps into the next 5 years that we could allocate to capital projects. But as you can see from the spreadsheet that was provided to you, the actual needs exceed that. Next year is $18 million. The year after that's 11, and then it just continues to grow. If you were to look at the 20-year plan, it's really quite a staggering figure, but I won't mention that figure tonight because you'll fall out of your chairs. Some of that, though, is funded through utilities. They have their own funding through rates, which actually it's still taxpayer dollars, but just in a different form. But they're also mandated by the EPA or the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Other projects could receive funding also from Arapahoe County Open Space, but we can't make the assumption for parks and recreation improvements that the Arapahoe County Open Space, or ACOS, is going to be able to cover all of our needs. What is more important to us at this point in time is that we take an opportunity to look at the prudent funding of projects that are infrastructure that we already own and that we need to maintain and cannot or do not want or wish to further defer the maintenance of. And so that's why we're here this evening, and we hope to have some more discussion with you, Council, and your thoughts and ideas on what's been proposed, or if you have other thoughts for projects that you've seen on this project list. These are projects, to use the vernacular of the old Tiger Grant program, that are shovel-ready for the most part. Some design's been done. There are some plans on the shelf to ensure that these projects are completed. And it is critical that we have the ability to address some of these now while there's funding available, rather than pushing it off into future years when funding may not become available due to the cyclical nature of our sales tax or other disruptions or interruptions to our ability to adequately fund our infrastructure. And it's very difficult for us as administrators here to not want to defer further maintenance and improvements. And so when we have an opportunity like we do now to have some funding where we have some capacity for project management to ensure that these projects get built and finished and constructed, we want to make sure that we can take that opportunity to move forward. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Berentine.
I appreciate the suggestions off of the 5-year. I really would like to see the how this would affect where the priorities kind of were in here, and maybe prioritize this a little bit more, because obviously given where we've picked the suggestions that you had out of there, I know had the shovel-ready kind of thing, things had already been analyzed. I mean, you obviously had already known that the roof was going to be the additional cost because that was already in there. And I would like to see how it would impact it if we took these out, where we would go ahead and also prioritize what we would be looking at for budget then this year for next year, so that we would kind of know if we take care of these things with this additional funds that we have, that how is that going to impact what we're going to prioritize for the budgeting process. I think that information is necessary, and I think it's extremely important, especially with 2 new council people, that we go ahead and include this in the 20-year plan as well. Even whether you think that's going to knock us out of our chair or not, we have to go. This year feeds into the 5-year plan. The 5-year plan feeds into the 20, and it has to be all done as a thoughtful prioritization process. So if we could kind of put these all together within that process, I think that would help in making decisions on where we're at. So that if we have some concerns that other things that are on this list are somewhat of a priority, but we already know that they're going to be things that we're going to be putting into 2019 because it's probably a better fit, and these things can be done sooner or have less prep time or something, then that will help in understanding the prioritization piece, and also helping the public know that we're not putting other things off. It's not this or that. It's this, and then it's feeding into that, and it's lightening up the load for next year, because that means that the $6 million that we're doing this year becomes $8 million and $8.5 million, and then we have a little less push on next year, or we can just go ahead and maybe anticipate another $2 million, and maybe we'll go a little farther out with what we're anticipating spending for next year. So if we could put that 20-year plan, I believe, Councilmember Costa, I think a couple meetings ago you wanted to make sure that you had access to the 20-year plan as well. So if we'll just feed those in, I know you thought that it might scare us, but I actually think it would help us to realize that planning has been done, and it will help us in the prioritization of it as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Those are some good points. The 20-year plan too. And again, this is always the case with large capital plans and with communities and cities or counties or even states. That number is always huge. The issue becomes much more murky beyond 5 years to be able to forecast the need. I mean, we've obviously tried to drop in projects where we think they're necessary to happen whether it's predicated on facilities and building standards for replacement or for critical infrastructure improvements due to permitting requirements from the state. But I hear what you're saying, and I think we can easily provide that to you so you can see that. Again,
Well, I realize you've done the work, so that,
Yeah.
that if we don't work the plan, we
Yeah.
don't plan the work, and then we don't work the plan, then
Yeah.
it never ends up happening, and then we have somebody 10 years from now going, I wish I had had some process or procedure to move forward with it. So at least if we're using the
Sure.
work that's already been done to kind of help us.
Right. This prioritization also emanated from, or was kind of recommended for approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission last year, and that's where some of these projects kind of fell, just so you're aware too. It wasn't just us throwing that on the wall. I think they've kind of looked at that and agreed to it, and we're going to be going through a similar process with them here very shortly as well with the 5-year.
And maybe that's a good idea, because the conversation that they had with us when they came and met with us is they felt that it kind of got done by staff and thrown at them, and I think this process will help clarify a little bit more how we'd like to see that flow into their deal of what they need to do at least by June. That's coming up. That's around the corner. So
Yeah.
as we're doing this and having this discussion, I think it'll help flow into what they need to do as
Yes.
a board too. And so are you saying that this is already in prioritized format?
is, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you, Mr. Keck. I appreciate the report. Pages 4 and 5 do have the spreadsheet of all the items of the 5-year capital improvement plan. So my understanding is that none of the projects in 2018, in the 2018 column, currently have any allocated or dedicated funding.
No, sir. The funding that we're showing in highlight in the yellow is what the projects that we're asking for. The funding that's in black is actually allocated and appropriated by this council for projects this year. So if we were to quickly go down the 18 list, you see there's $500,000 for the Englewood Recreation Center, and then $59,000 for asphalt and various parking lots for the parks and so forth.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Going to the roof, it looks like the total cost of the roof is going to be 1.6.
Correct.
And this request is for 1.1.
Correct.
Would it be done in phases then, and then the additional $500 million would come later to complete the project?
You could do it that way, sir.
500,000. Pardon me.
Yeah, 500,000. Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Let's
wish we
hope
had
we
that.
get that.
You could do it that way, but we wouldn't bid the project that way. We would do it all at once. It's a complex project in as much that we have solar or PV on the roof right now that would need to be removed, so they could remove the membrane as well as remove the insulation that's there. In some cases, the insulation probably needs to be replaced also, and so they just do it all at one point in time. The alternative, I think, that you're trying to get at is, could we just get by with $500,000? And, I'd have to bring up our facilities manager to talk to you about that. We could do that to protect the building and just look at certain areas that are in most need of replacement. We're concerned about the building envelope to ensure that no damage is done to the building itself. But you could probably defer that piece and get by with $500,000. But again, I think to do it properly and responsibly, you'd replace the entire membrane all at one time.
Sure.
Could I get a point of information? It says 1.6 here.
Correct.
Not 500,000.
That's what we have in the budget currently.
It was always budgeted for 2018, and in the 5-year plan, and I assume in the 20-year plan that it's 1.6.
No, ma'am, that's not accurate.
So did you change? Was this number changed?
For you tonight in your packet, yes.
It was changed for tonight in this packet.
Correct.
Oh,
So
that's
1.6.
that is concerning.
Why is that concerning?
Well, because I guess when we get to what we were thinking is the 5-year plan, that was what you said was already approved by.
Okay, point
And
of order.
that's all I wanted to know.
Okay.
He's answered my question, and I'm concerned about it. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm certainly not looking for the half measure. I just want to make sure we'll have full funds. We won't get 1.1 million into it, and then where's the additional 500K come from? And
Yes.
we've got, we're
You've got it,
three-quarters
yes,
of the
sir.
way done up there.
Yes.
Okay, and then on to the Cushing redesign. So there was an original 500K that was budgeted for gutter curb drainage work. And that the request was for 1.1 million. And it sounds like after the 500K, another 1 million will be needed to complete the phase 1 improvements. But those phase 1 improvements haven't been finalized yet. It looks like they're still being determined.
Yeah, they're in design, and they actually have been. I don't know if Ms. Hargrove wants to come up. She can actually describe those in greater detail for you.
Please.
Restrooms?
Good evening. Good at any park.
Thank
Always
you.
good to have.
The 500,000 that you referred to was a suggested approval for 2019. It wasn't approved in the 2018 budget. So my understanding is that this current request would be for $1 million for 2018,
right,
which would pay for finalizing the design. We have preliminary concepts and some pricing so that we could get through that. We need to work on, we want some community input to figure out what the top priorities, and then, if we had $1 million, we could make significant steps toward the full design, which is closer to $4 or $5 million, depending on how it's value engineered. But instead of just doing next year curb and gutter for $500,000, the $1 million would allow us to actually make some improvements that would be visible and useful for the community.
And then there would be additional funds required plus the 1 million.
To complete the park.
Sure.
The park will be usable without that additional, but it won't be all we hope it might be.
Okay.
Let's
Thank
put it
you.
that way.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes.
All right.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keck.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson?
Thanks. On the park, it's 3.5 that was slated for 2019. So the $1 million is in addition to that. I don't remember the
Phase, that's the first phase
it's
would
the
be $1 million.
So so it'd be 4.5 total, right? Is that what we were talking about?
Yeah.
Parks and Rec. Okay. So we'd be pulling 1 million in earlier, is
Yeah.
what we're saying. I'm sorry.
We're just no. Thank you. We're just accelerating.
Accelerating it. Sorry, not. Yeah, same thing. All right. Sorry, that
No,
was my
it's fine.
one for you. And then, so
Thank you.
I think I have a couple kind of bigger questions. One would be, I am interested in in relooking at the planning and zoning priorities. I am wondering, these seem doable to me, and I can see why each one would be needed. The one that concerns me the most is this building, because I think we need to have a really frank conversation again. Is this a viable building after how many years do we have left on it?
2023 would be the last debt
It's gonna
service payment.
come really fast. And whatever we do now, I mean, if it's got to last that long, or if we're going to do something earlier because we find another way around it, we need to have a hard conversation about this. And so I would not want to do that until we've done our homework on that one really hard. And I know that's not going to be easy, but unless everybody says, no, let's just, we're set on 2023 and that's it. But even then, will this building exist after 2023? I mean, will somebody, if we were to decide to sell it, would they take it down and do something completely new here? Because they have the depth of that if we decided to do. I have no idea. I'm not suggesting that anybody, but so that's a big question. And the third one is when we look at the prioritization and priority-based budgeting, or whatever we're calling it, how would these fit, like, within the different quadrants in terms of getting us further on some of these things? I think I would like that, a little bit of an overlay on that too.
Sure.
But I think these are, I can see why you picked these.
I can quickly answer your question, and it's not anecdotal. Capital projects that are on this list align very strongly, or quadrant 1, which means they're the highest expectation from the public to have reliable infrastructure. These projects wouldn't be on there if they didn't meet that reliable infrastructure standpoint.
All of them, or the yellow ones?
All of them. All of them, but the yellow projects...
Even the crossing at...
Yeah, the yellow, that's a public safety issue too,
Sure.
the crossing there. But these yellow projects were ones that were, as the prioritization was done by staff as well as with the Planning and Zoning Commission in the 2018 budget preparation process, these projects that are in yellow, but for the Fabra Dam and the plaza down here, rose to the top, but they weren't able to enter into the process because we didn't have adequate funding for the 2018 budget. We just threw the plaza on there because it's a public safety
Right.
issue that we have to find a way to address.
Yeah. So when we're making these decisions, because I think you have already done that homework and it's not noticeable here, if there was a way to actually have another maybe grid that gives us the prioritization so that it's really clear that we're not haphazardly picking some things out here, because you've thought this through already. I'd like to show that in some way because you've done the homework already. I think it supports what we're trying to do and also reminds us what we're doing, and if we don't agree with it, we can tell ourselves, well, okay, we agreed to this, and or decide to change it again.
Okay,
But thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Wink?
Thank you. One quick question, Manager Keck. With the roof work for the building, would that create the need for any movement of our staff or residents of the building while it's being worked?
No, the only thing that would be required would be the removal of the PV photovoltaic temporarily. We currently are blessed, knock on wood veneer, that we don't have any leaks in this roof.
Yeah.
However, the membrane life is to the point now where it is problematic. History tells us that whatever year Amoresco was contracted by the city, the system that's on the roof right now for solar actually leaked glycol, and it sat on the membrane for a while, and that glycol and plastic membranes don't get along real well. And so some patching has been done, but more patching needs to be done, or replacement to ensure the life of the building envelope from the roof standpoint.
As a new member, I would certainly be interested in having the conversation that Councilmember Olson raised, maybe for edification, but to understand the life of the building and what the longer-term strategy is, how that fits within our strategy as a whole.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. And thank you, Member Olson, for bringing that up. I was also going to suggest that we discuss that. It is a big, ticket item, obviously, but if we're not going to stay here, or maybe the building's not going to be here in 5 years, maybe it's not worth spending that. I don't know. But I would like to have that on the study session sometime coming up pretty soon. And then I had a secondary question as it relates to the roof. So this 1.6 does not include replacing those solar panels, correct? It would just be the same ones put back on there?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the same
Okay.
technology. Yeah, I knew that was going to come up, but yeah, that's true.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have some questions. I actually did dig out the 20-year capital project plan, and it is very concerning because, I understand, like, when I was looking at the utilities piece, that is paid out of the utilities fund, so that's all separate. But even the other things are huge numbers, and it seems like even in the, we're talking about millions of dollars, and we're only pouring $5 or $6 million in per year. And my concern is having a plan in place to how to deal with this before we just start spending. We have some excess fund here. I would actually like to look a little bit at that also. So I think actually, because of the lateness of the hour and needing to get next door, could we put this discussion again on a study session in a couple of weeks?
Sure. Yeah, certainly. Just to help out, it's one thing to say you want more information, I want to look at that. It would really help if you gave us some sort of framework to what you want to see, because what we have right now, aside for this year through 2021 or 2022 that has been prioritized, would be to understand what are your goals, what are you trying to achieve. Saying you just want to look at it again doesn't really give me great confidence to bring something forward that's going to be meaningful for you to look at. So if you could be very specific to ask, or again, I'm just going to be blunt because I always am, what's missing from this city is a strategy. If we had a strategy, we could actually look at and say, you know what, our number one priority is our infrastructure, and here are the goals for our infrastructure. We don't have that right now. So I'm shooting in the dark, hoping to hit targets, and largely what you have before you right now is a list that says these are the things that are on fire right now. that could turn into a dumpster fire if we don't address it. And so we really need to start to look at our capital facilities with some sort of other lens that gives us some specificity of direction.
Absolutely, and I do not disagree with you. I mean, this is really what I've been saying for 2 years, is we need to prioritize things, and is that the end goal of our strategic operating plan discussion?
Yes, it absolutely is. And so, again, we're hopeful that when you have the opportunity to meet with the public this month, you'll come back and say, yeah, the public agrees that you need to deal with your infrastructure. And then from there, that's when the real work begins. That's where the real work begins. The rubber meets the road with trying to set up a plan and strategy for sub-goals and objectives that you want to see us help you to execute.
Okay, thank you. I would like council to weigh in on what the city manager has asked for, and then we'll go from there. Councilmember Barentine?
I would like to have the 5-year plan, what was approved and budgeted. If there is any change to any number and you present something to us as the 5-year plan, we need to know that that number was changed. So make sure that we have that included, because I thought, why is he's just giving an explanation for that in this narrative? I didn't go back and have the time to check it with the original document, and any time a document we're given something and it's labeled as something that was approved and vetted and gone to planning and zoning, I just want to make sure that we have some notation on there that number's been changed. That's why I asked the question that I asked, because when we're showing that to the public, we need to make sure that there's some consistency and things aren't being changed in there. I'd like to see this with the original 5-year plan with any changes, kind of put in there along with the 20-year plan. We have had transformation point. We've had 2 different types of budgeting already in the 3 years that you've been here, and certainly in the 2 years that I've been here. And there comes a time when we stop saying that we're creating strategic plans and doing all this and start implementing things, because for as long as I've been here, we've been working on developing and paying people and consultants and doing plans. So we need to start really getting down to what you're talking about, and that's prioritizing things and figuring out how that piece happens to it. So if we could have those 3 and how that is going to meld into each other, I think that would help me a great deal. So thanks.
So the 3 things, this is what I have, the 5-year plan with changes and notations?
As it was voted, right. As
the original, and then the 20-year plan.
And the 20-year plan, and how you expect that this is going to flow in to those for your suggestions of that, whether or not we fix this roof or not, whether that's going to make it a more viable property in 2023, I don't know. Some of those suggestions, at least for the 4 things that you've put forward, would be of some value too.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Olson.
Thank you. I wonder if we need maybe from you a structure of what it is exactly you need us to decide to tell you, because I mean, it's funny because 2 years ago I remember saying I want all these things to integrate. You remember my drove me nuts to work on goals forever, and then they didn't seem related to all these others. So I think what I could use from you is, what is it you're needing us to make a decision on for you, or to give direction on? Or because instead what I would prefer maybe is you to say, okay, this is what it looks like with a plan A, here's a plan B, and here's some ways to go at either one of them, or maybe there's a C, I don't know. And I am sure some of them are going to call for different kinds of funding, and that's fine. And some of it's pared back like, no, we can't do any of this, and we're going to have to just, deal with the fact that our infrastructure is not going to get solved. I mean, it's hard to figure out the federal government and some of the things that are being talked about on the federal level about infrastructure, because if some of those came through, we could actually, I would prefer to be looking for where can we do things with others like urban drainage. That's wonderful if we hold off on that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what it is you're missing from us. If you could give us some categories for that you want us to be thinking about and giving you better direction, I would be glad to hear that.
Yeah, and it's been really simple. My message hasn't changed in 3.5 years, and that message is council, as the policy-making body, needs to lay out very clearly what and where and how do you wish to expend your funding. These capital projects are not a wish list; they're a need list, and it's infrastructure that we own that we should be taking care of. But We've done as best we can to contain cost, and I think that's very evident and clear from looking at each budget year, some of the successes that we've had.
I'm not questioning that.
No, but what I'm getting at is that same pot of money again, I agree with what the mayor has said, and that is we can't expect to throw $6 million at a $234 million target and expect it to really make a dent. We have to figure out, what are your objectives? We may not be able to provide or maintain all the infrastructure that we've got if we continue. We've been lucky to this date because we have very well dedicated employees who just deal with each of these issues that needs to be dealt with at a time. And so we need for council to be very clear, prioritization of funding. Maybe it's something operational that we have to cut, but you're not going to be able to cut enough operations to cover that deficit in capital projects. So that's what we're looking for directionally. And one thing that I will take issue with, we have not changed our budgeting to the point where that's impacted.
No, we haven't.
Nor have nor have consultants been utilized to help with a strategy for you as a council. You as a council have to come up with a strategy. We're more than willing to help. I think what we need to do is stop looking at transactions for a while and focus on strategy and figure out what's important to you, come to an agreement, go to the public and say, public, do you agree with this? And then let us execute. Because right now like I said, we're storming every hill, trying to take every hill that we can.
Well, and that's what Denver did in order to get their funding to do the infrastructure, which they did a whopping amount for, but the public knew what the heck they were asking for.
Right.
But we've got to figure that out for ourselves. What
Sure.
is it? I mean, this is a laundry list that is not just laundry, it's critical kinds of things.
Absolutely.
All of us have that in our own lives, so we have to then figure it out. But yeah, so I'm very supportive of having another conversation and figuring out what are the categories where we need to decide. Are we going to, we've got to either cut some other things to do it, or we've got to get new funding. We've got to have a different way to do this. It's not going to work. And I feel your pain and frustration. Yeah. Maybe we need a little bit more, okay, lay it out for us in some way to say, here's where you have to just decide. Are you going to do this or not? And are you going to try and go after this or not? There's some hard decisions we're going to have to make.
Actually, kind of what I just heard you say is perhaps we need to lay this discussion aside right now. And I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. What I just heard is perhaps we need to lay aside these 4 things and decide what we're going to do and where we're going to prioritize.
Yes.
And
we can park the $2.8 million into the fund balance. That's not a problem. But what needs to be done is you, council, need to say, you know what's important to us? Yeah, Cushing Park is important to us. Or doing more on Broadway is important to us. Whatever it is, we're happy to execute and make it happen. But you, in concert with our constituents, need to figure out what's important.
Okay, I am committed to moving that forward. I mean, but it is going to take work on council's part. Councilmember Wink.
So, thank you. I'll be quick. So we have March 7 and March 15 when the public is going to review these categories and what we all seem to feel very strongly about last week. Isn't that what we're talking about doing?
Yes.
So can we all have a working session after that when we have the public's feedback? Something maybe?
Well, and I think that's kind of how the plan is really designed
about,
to
and pull all these pieces
to
that we
go
mentioned
right.
together
Right.
in some
Absolutely.
ways, and then iron out the priorities where we see citizens support, where we know what our goals and our objectives are. I mean, it seems like these conversations will go down to a pretty simple.
I think
Simplified.
ideally, yes. Realistically, but I am hopeful that we can move. This whole plan has gone forward differently than it did 2 years ago, and so I'm hopeful that it will move forward quicker. I do have one question because it's almost 7 o'clock. Can we take up this last agenda item during council members' choice
Yes.
in the other room?
Correct.
Can I just ask a point of information then on the,
Yes.
on the capital needs? I mean, when it goes into the community workshops, maybe we can talk about it later, but they need to have, the citizens need to have this information that we just got tonight again and have seen several times in order to give us more. I mean, we're asking very general questions right now, strengths, weaknesses, that kind of thing, but if we want them to give us feedback on this kind of thing and help us prioritize it, we gotta bring those goods with us on next week and the following.
We'll have them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. 5-minute break, and we will, so we'll adjourn this meeting, and we'll take it up next door in 5 minutes.